Fantastic. Okay, well, let's wait maybe one more minute because there's 18. I always love seeing how many come after the registrations 'cause there are 108 registrations, which I in no way anticipated. Sorry, I in no way anticipate that many arriving, but usually there are, of course, a good amount. Um, ch- but that's 1 minute past. I think we can go ahead and get started. Great. Okay, hello and welcome everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to our March session of our Afghanistan speaker series that we host here at the Global Campus of Human Rights. My name is Julia Rente. I will be co-moderating for the day. You will see, of course, here are our panel who will be speaking throughout the day, but of course, you will not see them all the entire time, but just as kind of an introduction. Just to go over a little bit of our theme and format, I will do that first, and then I will give a little bit more introduction to what the Global Campus is, our Afghanistan program, and then I will pass it over to Rosita Secondari from the E.MA Alumni Association, who will give a little more information about their program, what they do, and some of the advocacy work they're doing in Afghanistan. And then, of course, we will go right into our three speakers, which Rosita will tell a little more about. We also will have a Q&A session closer to the end. We will be using the Q&A box. We do have the chat disabled. So if there are any issues, of course, you can put it in the Q&A, but there is no chat box enabled. If you think of questions throughout the session, you may put it already in the box. If not, we will have our Q&A session after the speakers. The session is being recorded. Of course, it is mostly for internal use, but there is usually I have to give my security warning for your video, but of course we are doing a webinar format today, so we do not have the extra video of all the participants today. So with that, I would like to give a little bit introduction of what the Global Campus is. So the Global Campus of Human Rights, for those of us who are not familiar, because I know we do have some attendees today who are not either an alum or a student or part of our network. We are a network of about 100 universities around the world, and our main focus is human rights education, specifically human rights masters. We have 8 regions around the world in which we have our masters based, as well as other capacity building and training programs. Our 8 regions are Europe, where we have both our secretariat as well as the head of our European program, based here in Venice, Southeast Europe, the Arab world, Africa, the Caucasus, Central Asia, Asia Pacific, and Latin America and the Caribbean. One of these extra capacity building and training programs we have done has been our Threatened Afghan Students and Scholars program, which primarily has been a scholarship program. We, as a university network, felt the social responsibility to do what we could to help those either who could not start or who had to stop their higher education due to, of course, the Taliban takeover, which took place in August of 2021. Many people were affected, of course, as we know, women being the majority of that. So what we did was we developed a scholarship program to help those who had a connection to human rights, whether it was a direct connection of it, as in studying an LLM in international law and human rights, or those who had a looser connection, such as journalists, artists, and people who work in different fields that just help promote and advocate for human rights. We affiliated them with a university in our network, and to date, we have helped 38 individuals, many of which with spouses and family, uh, either relocate or once they had relocated with a scholarship for a short time. We have also done some different programming under this scholarship program, including a symposium and 2 years of a Nowruz, which is, of course, the Afghan New Year celebration here at our monastery here in Venice, Lido. Sorry, Lido is our beach island here in Venice, for those who don't know. Uh, as well as this monthly speaker series, which we have been doing now for 1 month and a half, sorry, 1 year and a half, 1 month and a half. The scholarship factor of our program is no longer continuing at this time at the end of this fiscal year, just because, as many of us are very well aware, the spotlight of attention as well as funding for Afghanistan is going down and down. And that is one of the reasons why we do want to continue things like the speaker series to keep that highlight and attention on Afghanistan, because the situation is not improving. It is just deteriorating, and we want people to understand what's going on. So we've been holding this monthly speaker series, and this month, of course, in connection with International Women's Day, which is tomorrow, we wanted to hold a series session that focused on women. Hence our theme today, which is Afghanistan's human rights situation, a spotlight on women's rights in the country and the diaspora. And this is being done in collaboration with our alumni association. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Rosita to give a little more information on that.
Thank you so much, Ms. Julia. Hello and salam to our speakers and everyone joining in from different time zones around the world. It's really a privilege to be here today on this important platform to discuss the current human rights situation in Afghanistan. Well, I'm honored to introduce our incredible speakers, the BM, which we call her BM for safety reasons. She's a researcher and an advocate from Afghanistan, Ms. Frishta Abbasi, a researcher in the Asia Division at Human Rights Watch, and Ms. Sharzad Akbar, the Executive Director of Rawadari, all who bring the voices from within Afghanistan and the diaspora. I look forward to hearing their insights and sharing this space with all of you today. I'll be moderating the discussion with our first and third speakers. But before that, I would love to take a moment to introduce E.MAlumni and the Advocacy Committee as well. I'm a graduate of the Global Campus of Human Rights, Europe in 2024, as Ms. Julia also mentioned, and I am a member of the E.MAlumni Association, which is a network that brings together alumni of the European Masters in Human Rights and Democratization with the aim of building a community where alumni learn from each other, connect, and promote human rights across the globe. The Advocacy Committee was actually created as a subgroup of the E.MAlumni Association in order to advance human rights through advocacy and campaigning. We want to activate the vast expertise which exists in the E.MAlumni organization to exercise and develop human rights. The Advocacy Committee prepared the strategy for 2025, selected 3 priorities on Palestine, Afghanistan, and climate emergency for the first few months, and strengthened the group by incorporating many new active members as well. So during this period, we prepared open letters on Palestine, and we are presenting at the end of this webinar one that supports women in Afghanistan. So stay tuned for that. The committee is always open to new members who can commit part of their time to advance the fight for human rights in Europe and beyond. Now I would like to begin with our first speaker, which I would call her BM, as I mentioned previously, for safety and security reasons. She is joining us from inside Afghanistan. She's a legal researcher, human rights advocate, and women's rights activist from Afghanistan. Holding a law degree from Herat University, she has worked on constitutional law, governance, and human rights, serving in the youth leadership roles and co-authoring works on Afghanistan's legal challenges. Committed to justice and gender equality, she continues to advocate for the rule of law and the rights of Afghan women and marginalized communities. Thank you so much, BM, for being here today. We are so pleased to have you. I would like to ask if you could share your perspectives on the situation of women in Afghanistan, considering all the restrictive decrees that are imposed since 2021. How these measures impacted women's rights and their daily lives, especially from your experience of living in Afghanistan. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Hello, Ristajan and all the members of panel and all our attendees. So considering your question, I want to say that how could be the situation when you live in a country where as a woman, you face nothing but restrictions in the very golden years of your life. It has been years. It's almost 4 years that Afghan girls are living under the flag of torture and absolute totalitarianism. They are witnessing the history backsliding, and experiencing what their parents and grandparents have gone through under the Taliban regime under first Taliban regime when they first took over Afghanistan years before. And now they are the main actors of this history, and they are, directly subject of clear violence and isolation. It's clear that since Taliban took over in 2021, they issue over 100 degrees focusing on women rights restrictions, and which these restrictions severely limited women access to education, employment, healthcare, movement, and public life. Coming to education part, regarding education, we can say that girls above sixth grade are banned from attending to school. They are prohibited to attend university. Girls in Afghanistan cannot take university entrance exam. And a specific field of studies or, for example, agriculture and engineering are eliminated from educational system in Afghanistan, specifically for girls. They are not allowed to, even they are allowed to go to university, they are not allowed to, study these fields. Besides all these things, 2 years midwifery, institutions that had been a beacon of light in this for girls living in Afghanistan, they also closed a few months before. So you see that we have nothing in education field for girls now in Afghanistan, and it's not just it's not just about education. Coming in work field, we can see that women are banned from working in most of the NGOs and governmental institutions at all. They are not allowed to even go there, let alone working there with men. Girls are not allowed to work, in considering a movie field and these things. They are not they are not allowed to work in film. They are not allowed to, play a role in an advertisement. And you are not allowed, as a woman girl in Afghanistan, you are not allowed to work in the media without covering your face. So as a woman in Afghanistan, you cannot be a flight attendant anymore. So overall, in Afghanistan, no one is allowed to work, but minority groups of girls who are still working, they have to, tolerate, they have to obey devastating restrictions. So you see that education and work is almost, we are done with these two fields. And coming from other decrees that Taliban posed is regarding daily life of women in Afghanistan. For example, visiting parks are prohibited in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, a girl cannot go to gym just for exercising, and they cannot, as a girl in Afghanistan, you cannot, travel more than 72 kilometers without a mahram. And as a girl, you really struggle in walking around just to take a breathe, or even go to grocery for buying a bottle of water, because every single time when you walk around, you're always afraid of being punished because of wearing a type of hijab that they are not, that this group does not like it. And beside that, we also struggle in using public transportation. For example, it happened very often that the driver had been misbehaved or harassed by Taliban because he let a woman take into the car and he just drop her off to somewhere that girl wanted to, wanted to go. So all these restrictions, and being really closely in touch with these girls uh, in my community, I see that how these restrictions impacted on them and how negative these restrictions have been to girls. Especially for this generation who were born and raised under the flag of our somehow past democratic country, a country where at least people and also the governmental officials had a respect to human rights, especially women rights. So according to girls that I'm in touch with them, although our previous government was not perfect, but it was a little bit, it was not better than this. It was not this. We are doing nothing in this situation. So being deprived from knowledge and opportunities for women who once dreamed of finishing their school, attending university, and building career caused them to feel hopeless, anxious, and depressed because education was more than just learning for Afghan girls. It was source of purpose for them. It was source of improvement for them and social connection. That was through the learning they make connection with others, with girls. But now Afghan girls are confined in the home. They are kind of in isolation, and they are cut off from their friends, their ambitions, and the future that they once worked very hard for. So this is why we see the increasing number of girls that get into mental health issues. So this the most disappointing thing about this mental health issue is that we have extremely less mental health services in Afghanistan because it's not accepted by people culturally, and Afghan families does not think that a mental health issue can they does not take it serious as other illness that someone can have. So this is why girls, they are suffering from, mental health issues in silence with no support. Another mentionable point about women's situation and women's situation is that uh, they are not only the victim of gender-based, restrictions, but they are also the ongoing economic crisis in the country make them more vulnerable to violence. For example, um, uh, you know. Uh, 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 since Taliban took over, lots of men lost their jobs. They are jobless. They are not working because they were working in national army or in another governmental institutions, and now they are unemployed and they cannot work. So financial crisis caused them to even against their will marry off their children or marry off their girls in very early ages to marry them off. So this is why and you see that we see the increasing number of forced marriages in Afghanistan day by day through these years. But the disappointing point for me as a girl is that I see the less the resist of girls against this forced marriages. I see that girls are not, has they do not say that, they do not feel that they can say no to their parents, and they think that there is no education, there is no way to education, there is no way to work. So maybe marriage is that future that I'm seeking for, or maybe this is the only way that I can choose to. So for me, and in my idea, this comes from the fact that schools are banned, universities are banned, media are censored, and that capacity building programs that have been, always applying or conducting in Afghanistan, they are all, banned. NGOs are not helping now in Afghanistan. They are not helping people. Awareness projects for women are, banned. So how a woman can get this awareness that she has the right to say no to her father, or to be at least hopeful for a better future. So all these things makes me feel that we are, losing our past 20 years achievements through these years, especially about the girls' literacy and, in everything, in legal issues, and also another related life. Another related issues into life. So for me, it's really important to say from Afghanistan to do not let Afghan women forget who they used to be, because if these restrictions continue to impose to Afghan girls, they will somehow be because they are all Afghan girls are not educated enough. They were in the grade 7 of the school. They were in the 8th grade of the school that they banned and they restricted to go to school. So they do not have this knowledge. They do not have this rationale to just fight with the restrictions. So as a Afghan woman living in Afghanistan, I ask for all the international community and other nations to just do not forget Afghan women and help them provide educational programs. It doesn't matter if it is in school level, if it's in bachelor level, master level, and doctorate level, because this is the only thing that can help us to just fight with this all the miseries that are going through.
Thank you so much, BM. You touched upon very important points, and they were eye-opening as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Yes, that's from what the things you were seeing and experience, of course, every day, because so much of what we hear is from the external opinion and perception. So thank you for giving that narrative and your story. Moving on, we are going to move over to our next speaker, Freshta Abbasi, who will give a little bit more, of course, of a legal experience background from her work. A little bit about Freshta, who I've now known for probably about 2 years now. Freshta has spoken in this series before in one of our events, one of our sessions last year, as well as taken part in the symposium we had 2 years ago as well, before we had the speaker series. So a little bit about Freshta Abbasi. She is a researcher in the Asia division of Human Rights Watch, focusing on research and documentation of ongoing abuses in Afghanistan. For the past 10 years, she has documented human rights abuses in Afghanistan with different organizations, of course, currently with Human Rights Watch, and also with the All Survivors Project. She was previously a legal advisor from the International Development Law Organization, IDLO, where she trained and developed employees' legal skills within the Afghan justice sector. She holds an LLM in International Law and Strategic Studies from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland and was a Chevening Scholar in 2019-2020. She's published greatly on human rights issues in the Afghan media, as well as now internationally, and of course is coming directly from giving statements and speaking at the Human Rights Council, which has just closed. So with that, and of course, coming from the Human Rights Council and all the work you've been doing lately with a lot of advocacy and work, you've been pushing for a lot of legal implications that can come with the human rights abuses that have been happening. With this, can you elaborate a little bit on the work that you've been doing with this, of course, relation to CEDAW with the ICJ and other things, and the current status of all of that?
Sure. Thanks so much, Julia, for a very generous introduction. Let me say that it's an honor for me to share this panel with BM from Women from Inside Afghanistan. I want to really appreciate the courage and bravery of her joining from within the country and speak about the situation. We all know how risky it is for women inside Afghanistan to raise their voices and speak about what is happening on the ground. With that, let me tell you a little bit about all what is happening. I mean, I woke up this morning thinking that I've been thinking that, or at least this has been the sort of the narrative that the Taliban have done all they could do against women and girls, and this is the worst that we are seeing. And I was actually going through the local news this morning, and I saw that one of the local medias have reported that now the Taliban have banned women to enter mosques in Herat province of Afghanistan. And I was shocked. And I was like, the moment you think it cannot get worse with them, and it actually can. And it happened simultaneously when I was working on a statement about the freedom of religion and religious freedom in the country. So, I mean, it's devastating to hear all of these news coming from Afghanistan every day. But as you said, it's also devastating to see that Afghanistan is not in the headlines anymore. No one really reports about it. No one really talks about it. We don't hear much about what is happening in the country, especially against women and girls. I mean, BM, I think, very well explained the situation on the ground, and I'm not going to talk about the sort of the systematic discrimination that the Taliban are imposing on women and girls in Afghanistan. Of course, to all citizens of Afghanistan, including men and women, but especially it impacts hugely women and girls in the country. And in 2025, Afghanistan remains the only country where women and girls do not have access to secondary and higher education. And I mean, as she very well comprehensively explained that, it's literally a prison for women in the country, and it's difficult from inside to stay hopeful for a better future. And that's why I have been trying to, with Human Rights Watch, we have been trying to not only amplify the voices of Afghan women inside Afghanistan, but also try to advocate and see if there are space for windows of hope to press for them and to make sure that women in Afghanistan hear about these things. So, beginning with the International Criminal Court, I mean, let me begin with a little bit of sort of good news. The International Criminal Court in earlier this year announced the applications, the request for applications of arrest warrant for 2 members of the Taliban leader, including the Hibatullah Khundzada, the leader of the Taliban, based on the crimes against humanity of gender persecution. Many organizations had already reported and identified the situation in Afghanistan as the crimes against humanity of gender persecution. It is good news to see that the ICC's prolonged investigation in Afghanistan finally had some results, and now the prosecutor had, filed applications of arrest warrants for the 2 of the Taliban leaders. I think it's huge. Shahzad is on the call as well. The day that this announcement was made, we were actually both together and we cried. And for me personally, it was sort of a double-sword age. I mean, I was happy that the ICC investigation has reached to this point. I was happy to see that somebody is looking into what is happening in Afghanistan, and there are individuals who are ultimately being held to account for what they're doing against women and girls. But at the same time, it was deeply saddening for me to see that it was sort of kind of an endorsement of the extent of repression in Afghanistan. So I almost had a panic attack after the announcement was made, because it was too much to absorb at that point. It was for the first time that an international court came and said that, yes, we believe that the Taliban are committing the crimes against humanity of gender persecution, and it's huge. I mean, the crimes against humanity of gender persecution, the systematic discrimination in the country, it's huge. And it was difficult for me to absorb the news, but also actually to accept and convince myself that my sisters in Afghanistan, that my friends in Afghanistan are living under a situation where the crimes against humanity of gender persecution is being committed against them, and their fundamental rights are being denied on a daily basis. I mean, not to say that we didn't know this was happening, but this endorsement itself was deeply saddening for me. And I'm hoping that the investigation doesn't end here and the court, prosecutor requests for more arrest warrants for other Taliban members who are responsible for imposing these policies and for crafting and drafting these policies as well. So with the ICC investigation, as the prosecutor himself announced that they've already requested 2, but they will be requesting more soon. I'm really hoping that they're looking into the situation, and similarly at the same time, I think it's very important for the member states to encourage ICC investigation, especially at a time that the world order has changed. It's a crazy time. It's an extremely difficult time. We're hearing about sanctions against ICC. So I'm really hoping that at this point, states are supporting and encouraging ICC to make sure that they're still continuing carrying out their investigation in Afghanistan. And hopefully we will see more arrest warrants for other members of the Taliban as well. I'm also coming from, actually after Geneva, I went to Berlin. There was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany had arranged a consultation with Afghan civil society alongside with 3 other member states who are the initiating states of this case, Australia, Canada, and the Netherlands. The consultation, I mean, it was the first ever in-person consultation with the Afghan civil society, and we also published a statement echoing our advocacy calls on the initiating states on how they should handle this process and how they should ensure the meaningful participation of Afghan women throughout the process. So last September, these 4 states, as I named, made an announcement, notification of dispute with the state of Afghanistan based on the Convention on Prohibition of Any Forms of Discrimination Against Women and Girls. Afghanistan has ratified this convention on 2003, and under this convention, which is one of the most important legal documents when it's come to respecting and protection of women's rights in international human rights law, has the obligation to make sure that not only respects but also protects women's rights. And I think we all sort of agree that all provisions of CEDAW has been violated in Afghanistan, and the Taliban do not have any intention to respect or protect women's rights. So I think that's also good news to see that some states, some CEDAW member states, are taking legal actions to hold the Taliban accountable for the violations of this convention. We are still at a very early stage. Usually within the process, once a CEDAW, I mean, a party to the convention announces its notification of dispute, usually there's a time period where states are supposed to negotiate and discuss on the basis of what the dispute is. And I think in this case, it's basically all the bans on the restrictions on women and girls and the denial of, I mean, fundamental rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. So we're still in the negotiations period. I mean, supposedly these 4 states needs to reach out to the Taliban and discuss and to see whether the Taliban have any intention to reverse the bans that they have imposed on women and girls in the country. If the negotiation fails, then they can go to arbitration. So unfortunately, there is no timeline for this negotiation. What the procedure is basically that the 2 parties, who are the disputing parties, needs to engage in negotiations in good faith to solve this. And if it doesn't work, then they need to go to arbitration. There's a 6 months minimum period for arbitration. And if that fails, then they can file the case at the International Court of Justice. So that's how this works. So I mean, technically, we're speaking about like a couple of years to get there. I mean, it could happen as fast as in a year, but also I'm thinking that it may take actually more than that because the court will only take cases where it sees that the negotiation process has been fulfilled in good faith and it has failed, and then the arbitration has also failed. So that's sort of how it works. But one thing that we all know and quite certain are that CEDAW, I mean, there is a legal dispute here. So there's no question about the legality of the case. So there's a case here, there's a legal dispute. The Taliban have violated all CEDAW provisions, and it's really a matter of the process and the procedure that they're going to go through. And we do have some advocacy calls. I mean, Afghan civil society had published this statement and had some advocacy calls to make sure that these 4 states are continuously consulting with women of Afghanistan throughout the process and how they're handling, the negotiation process, later arbitration, and if the case goes to the International Court of Justice. And I think it's great for us to see that every international court at this point is going after the Taliban. So they need to know that they cannot do whatever they want in Afghanistan with immunity, basically with free hands. Even though the wheels of justice it usually takes a long time, but it will reach them and it will hold those who are responsible for these accountable. So I think these two have opened a window of hope for women in the country. At least they can see that the world is listening to them and they're hearing them, and at the same time they're taking actions. They're using all the mechanisms. At least like they're using the available mechanisms to do what they could do. And I will also briefly speak about the gaps that I see, because I was in Geneva as well. One of the things that is quite concerning for me in Afghanistan at this point is that we don't have a documentation mechanism. We don't have a UN independent documentation mechanism. We have the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, Richard Bennett, who's doing an incredible job and has the full support of the Afghan civil society. We have the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, who is supposed to, document the situation of human rights in Afghanistan and engage with the authorities in the country to press for potential change. But we don't have an investigative accountability mechanism in the country who can document the violations up to a legal standard that could be used as evidence in the court, which could be mandated by the UN Human Rights Council based in Geneva. So in similar situations, like in Syria and Myanmar, the countries had a sort of an investigative accountability mechanism, which would complement the work of Special Rapporteur, but would basically prepare file cases for the international courts. It will be able to help the ongoing investigation of the International Criminal Court. It will help the ongoing investigation at the, if the case reaches to the ICJ, it will also contribute to the ICJ case. But at the same time, it will identify perpetrators, which for me is huge. My concern is that the physical evidence will go away in a couple of years if we don't document them now, if we don't preserve them now. So we, since September 2024, the Afghan human rights defenders and civil society have been really pressuring the UN Human Rights Council to mandate an independent human rights, an independent investigative accountability mechanism from the Human Rights Council to document the violations in Afghanistan, preserve evidence, and identify perpetrators to complement the work of Special Rapporteur. In the past 4 years, we keep saying that the Taliban are doing this and doing that. The Taliban are committing crimes against humanity, gender persecution, for example. But who is doing this within the Taliban leadership? Who is implementing it in different provinces? No one is currently documenting that. And so far we only have 2 names that the ICC has identified. We don't have a wider range, and I'm really hoping that the member states at the Human Rights Council, especially EU member states, because EU is the pen holder for the Afghanistan resolution, puts a technical resolution even this session, because the session is still ongoing until the 20th of March, to establish an independent investigative mechanism for Afghanistan as soon as possible, because it's needed more than ever, especially in the light of the Taliban's new law on the promotion of virtue and prevention of vice.
Thank you, Farashta. That was a very, very in-depth, of course, a brief in-depth update on kind of the status of things. And there are a couple of questions I have, but of course I will wait to our Q&A session that I would love for you to speak just a little bit longer on. But of course we do want to then hand the floor over to our 3rd speaker of the day, who also, before I hand it over to Rosita for a brief bio, want to say actually, Shahrazad Akbar, who you'll hear more about in a moment, was actually a guest at one of our very, very first Afghanistan events that we had here at the Global Campus back in March of 2022, along with Richard Bennett before he took up his place as Special Rapporteur. So it is also a wonderful welcome back. But I will give it to Rosita to give a small introduction.
Yeah, thank you. And also I would like to extend my gratitude to Ms. Farishta Abbasi, because the recommendations that I've heard, they are very, very strong and truly we need in this context, especially. So I would like to now turn with our last speaker, Ms. Shahrazad Akbar. I'll give her bio. She is Executive Director of Rawadari, an Afghan civil society organization focused on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, including those of women, girls, and marginalized groups. She currently in exile, is a human rights activist and the former chairperson of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. She has advocated for the human rights of Afghans, a dignified and just peace, and accountability for gross violations at the international level. In addition to leading Rawadari, she is currently a visiting scholar with Wolfson College, University of Oxford. Her writing has appeared in the Washington Post, Foreign Affairs, Al Jazeera, and the other international outlets. She has briefed the UN Security Council several times, including in December 2023. Thank you so much for being here today. I've always followed your work when I was residing inside Afghanistan and now abroad. And it's now my pleasure to discuss and hear your perspective using this platform. I would like to ask you about the organization you lead, which is Rawadari, and that has been researching and documenting the violations of women's rights in Afghanistan. So could you please talk a bit about that and also tell us the examples of resistance you have found? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rosita John, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you and to hear from BM and from Prashta John. And to add to these insights, Rawadari is an Afghan human rights organization operating from exile, but we work with a group of data providers inside Afghanistan. So we have a group of people inside the country that are documenting the human rights situation in Afghanistan and monitoring the human rights situation in Afghanistan in a very under very difficult circumstances, of course, because of the security situation and the increasing Taliban restrictions on civic space. In fact, the closure of civic space. Rawadari has three main areas of work that are related to each other, and I think sort of can give you a sense of the response to the human rights situation in Afghanistan by the Afghan human rights community. One key pillar of work for us is monitoring and documentation of human rights violations and public reporting on them. Rawadari has so far published 12 human rights reports in Dari and Pashto, as well as in English. Our reports are primarily prepared in local languages and then translated to English. And our audience is primarily the Afghans, because we think it's very important for the people of Afghanistan to see their truth, the truth of the situation mirrored to them, and to battle misinformation and Taliban propaganda, as well as propaganda and misinformation by other sides. So the human rights reports are 2 special reports per year, 1 annual and 1 6-month report. And that allows us to get a sense of the trends, the violations, the key perpetrators, at least at the institutional level, of violations inside Afghanistan. In addition to the human rights reporting, documentation and reporting, the second pillar of work for us is accountability efforts, and particularly victim-centered justice and accountability. So we try to bring the voice of victims and survivors into accountability efforts. First, John spoke in detail about some of the accountability processes that are currently ongoing, or the ones that we hope will happen. So in all these processes, and the ICC investigation of Afghanistan, as well as the efforts around the International Court of Justice and the CEDAW, are holding Taliban accountable for violations of CEDAW, as well as the work of the Special Rapporteur. Rawadari has been involved either in providing evidence or information, or in advocating for these pathways, as well as consulting and involving Afghan human rights activists and Afghan civic community inside Afghanistan to these initiatives, because we think that these initiatives, these international initiatives, are of course very welcome, very much needed, but they're only meaningful to the extent that they can involve Afghans, and that they can be led by Afghans, and particularly by survivors. In addition to accountability efforts, our work on accountability and victim-centered accountability, we are also, another pillar of work, or the third pillar of work, is expanding culture of human rights. I think when we initially started work, we were somewhat optimistic that we would have more space to do human rights work, at least promotion of rights work inside Afghanistan in some ways, or support work for promotion of rights inside Afghanistan. As is clear to all of us now, that's impossible. There is really no room for civic initiatives unless they're secret, around human rights inside the country. Even people advocating for the right to education for girls face detention, torture, threats. Freedom of media has been severely restricted. So the work that we do now around expanding culture of human rights is really mainly about, it's twofold. It's having ongoing consultations and engagement that are private with Afghan civic actors inside Afghanistan, particularly women in different parts of the country, to ensure that they can feed into our advocacy and to ensure that we can find ways to connect them to resources. Additionally, the other aspect of the work is to have social media campaigns, public events, public virtual events that could also be accessible to people inside Afghanistan on human rights issues, on a variety of human rights issues, mostly linked to our own documentation work, but from, discussions on illegal arrests and detention to enforced disappearances, to the right to education for women, the rights of minorities, freedom of expression. So we have held events, public events on all these issues and women's rights from an Islamic perspective. So these are the three pillars of work that are interconnected to each other and feed into each other. In our work inside Afghanistan, particularly with our documentation work, we get a kind of a close view of the patterns under the Taliban rule. So initially, when Taliban first came to power, the focus of their repression was former security forces. So we saw a string of extrajudicial killings across Afghanistan. We documented hundreds of cases of extrajudicial killings of former security forces, as well as illegal detentions. A few months into their role, they turned their focus, or they expanded their focus of repression also to women protesters and women activists. You may have seen that the initial first 2 months after Taliban's return, we had still independent media reporting from inside Afghanistan with a bit more freedom. You also would see more street protests, more women going on the streets to raise their voice against Taliban's tyranny. However, very quickly, Taliban caught on to the soft power of these forces, the civic forces, and continued on the campaign that they had started many years ago, which is targeting and killing civic voices and among the religious scholars, but also civil society, or illegal detention. Campaign of illegal detention. So one trend that we have seen is that worsening trend is that the space completely shrank for any form of civic protest, civic engagement with the authorities and trying to change their policies, bring pressure to change their policies from within Afghanistan. We have seen university professors being detained. We have seen school teachers being detained. We have seen activists and journalists being detained and repressed, and their family members detained and harassed. We have seen cases of enforced disappearance, etc. Another trend that we have documented is how Taliban introduced restrictions and then sort of in a few months following the enforcement of a restriction, add another restriction on top, and they just keep growing the extent of restrictions, particularly on the rights and freedoms of women. This all culminated, as Frishta also talked about, in the Prevention of Vice and Promotion of Virtue law, also known as the morality law, that came out in August 2024, that really essentially reinforced existing restrictions, but also introduced new restrictions, like restrictions on women's voices and restrictions on dissemination of the photos and imagery of any living being on TV or on media, for instance, and some other outrageous restrictions. Taliban not only introduced these restrictions, but also take the other step to build structures and strengthen structures that are in charge of enforcement. So over the past almost 4 years, we have seen strengthened Ministry of Prevention of Voice and Promotion of Virtue. This ministry is now one of the most powerful entities inside Afghanistan. They have staff across Afghanistan. Through the law, they introduced staff called Muhtasib. These muhtasibs we have had in the past incidents in the past few months of 2024, as well as early 2025, of them walking into offices of NGOs, walking into schools to enforce the law. For instance, they have walked into an NGO and seen that women and men colleagues still interact with each other, even limited interaction, and they have said, change this or we're going to close down this organization. You have a week's time. They walk into girls' schools and say, and remember, this is only girls up to 11-year-old, at most 12-year-old, because it's only till 6th grade that girls can go to school in Afghanistan currently. They have walked in and said, the way these children are dressed is not in accordance with the law. They must cover their faces. They must be more covered. They must refrain from, ABC. So there is an increased power of this institution and increased resources for the institution. While Afghanistan is grappling with a humanitarian situation, while teachers do not get paid salaries for months, we see more resources put into enforcing these really repressive restrictions. In addition, another institution that should certainly be on the ICC's list and any other accountability mechanism looking into Afghanistan is the Taliban's General Directorate of Intelligence. The intelligence is working very systematically to repress, to repress any sort of dissent. So even early in 2022, we saw the intelligence unit hiring people to look through social media accounts, to create fake social media accounts, to push Taliban's narrative, but also to look through social media accounts, to identify people who have made objections. Let's say someone writes something on Facebook about the fact that they don't have regular electricity since the Emirates came into power. Even people like this would get a phone call from the GDI saying, stop this. Delete your post, no further dissent from you unless you want to face the consequences. So our documentation work has allowed us to watch this increasingly devastating patterns. But I also want to go to the last part of your question, Ruzdajan, about the resistance and the fight back from inside Afghanistan. From day one, I mean, August 15, Taliban took over Kabul, August 15, 2021. August 16, you saw women on the streets marching for rights. Even before the world had reacted, women in Afghanistan were reacting to the situation. Of course, their reaction to the Taliban and their wariness about this goes far back throughout the so-called peace process led by the US. Afghan women were the loudest voices warning about an unconditional settlement, asking for conditions, asking for a clear discussion on women's rights and clear guarantees around protection of women's rights. But when Taliban came to power, that didn't stop women. They went out and marched on the streets repeatedly across Afghanistan. They faced repression, then they continued to adapt their tactics. Right now as well, Afghan women are on the forefront of preserving any civic resistance to Taliban, be it direct and confrontational, like going to the streets, or at home. At home, women have danced and recorded their video. Women have read poetry and recorded their video. Women have gotten together to celebrate occasions banned by the Taliban, like Nowruz, and have recorded their videos and put it on social media. Whether through these means or through trying to find ways at the local level to negotiate with local authorities, to keep running secret schools, to keep running, educational forums for girls, or book clubs, or just trying to get books and education and resources to other women, despite limitations that they face themselves, economic limitations, as well as security hardship. So that struggle is going on. I hope, as Farishta said as well, that some of these broader accountability efforts send a message to women of Afghanistan, to girls in Afghanistan, that they are not alone. But as BM also mentioned, it is a quite hopeless situation. My biggest concern would be the normalization of Taliban's policies, because women feel forgotten, because there are no options out there, because Taliban are also, on the other hand, creating madrasas and trying to mainstream their ideas about women's place in society through these madrasas that train both girls and boys, and think about what will happen in 5 years with this level of brainwashing. So I think we constantly in the Wadari think about how to counter Taliban's soft power, as well as, of course, and their attempts to radicalize the society, as well as, of course, trying to challenge them through international accountability mechanisms and leveraging our collective power to put pressure on countries, on the region, to not have an unconditional engagement with Taliban. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shahzad Akbar. That was amazing. Though I am also engaged with lots of human rights situation and issues around Afghanistan, but majority of the things that you mentioned were also very new to me. And it's very important to understand what is actually going on the ground rather than what is portrayed. Thank you so much for the great work you're doing. So I really thank all of our distinguished speakers and also the important points that all of them raised. I now would like to give the floor to Ms. Julia and Ms. Mariana to handle the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosita. And again, yes, thank you to our three speakers. So yes, we will move into our Q&A session now, which Mariana will help me moderate. And I do apologize, I did not introduce her earlier. Mariana Groba Gomez is part of our E.MA Alumni Advocacy Committee, and she will help me kind of direct the Q&A. If you do have any questions, of course, the box is already populating. Please do enter right in our Q&A box. It is at the bottom of your screen. There's a little box with a question mark and says Q&A if you're having trouble finding it. I would like to start off before we move over there. I do a couple of thoughts of reflection and one question I wanted to follow up directly with Frashta, or maybe the others want to chime in on. I think two things that really resonated me really a lot with when BM gave her thoughts was, the fear of just to buy a bottle of water to do that. And I think, people have been talking about kind of the situation on the ground in Afghanistan, but having a sentence like that or that you're cut off from your friends are ones that really resonate with people who are not really familiar. And I think that those are really powerful things to say, that will help some of our participants understand it better. And also then moving on with the idea that women are now banned from mosques. I had not heard that yet. I actually have not even looked at the news today. That's how today went. I'm also terrified off to open the news every day now, because of so many things coming from my own home country of the US, which again, and I apologize on behalf of Americans because of the ICC sanctions that are trying to come from my country, which is not helping this situation in particular. But kind of moving into some thoughts on questions. Fresha, talking about kind of the ICJ procedure, which yes, it is a long procedure and whatnot. There are two questions I was hoping you could help explain a little bit. So one, yes, we have the 4 states that are part of it. Is there a push to have other states join into this case? Is it staying as this is? That was just one thing. And then a secondary, which is kind of the bigger question. Of course, when it comes to any legal arbitration, there needs to be both sides. But of course, there is the bigger question of the engagement with the Taliban for anything, which I know is a big discussion in the international community of how it's managed. And I was hoping you could expand just a little bit on those two, and then we can move into the Q&A box.
Sure. I mean, in terms of the states, yes, that's actually, so 4 states are the initiating states. There are more than 23 or 24, Shahzad can correct me if I'm wrong, that are supporting the case, but not profiling necessarily, including some Muslim majority countries. I think Albania and Marrakesh are among the states who are supporting. And it is an ongoing procedure. At any point, states can actually join and support the case. For example, UK, I think, expressed joining the supporting states in December last year. So we are still calling on the CEDAW member states, which is more than 139 countries in the world, to join and support the case. We are hoping to see more Muslim majority countries, the OIC member states, for example, to support the case. And we're hoping that more states are joining to that. So, we currently have 4 states, but it's always an open door. And that was one of the calls from this statement as well. We're calling on the Muslim countries to join this case. In terms of the engagement with the Taliban, I'm personally very concerned about how this is being handled, and that's why in Berlin we tried to express our concern and said that there needs to be more transparency into this process. The only, I would say, the interesting part in this case is that it's literally state to state. So it really has nothing to do with women of Afghanistan. It has nothing to do with like the civil society. The interesting part of this litigation is that the damaged party at this point is Germany, Australia, the Netherlands, and Canada, not women of Afghanistan. So because these four states are basically saying that they're having a dispute. And one of the things that we're trying to make sure that we're part of it, and we're trying to make sure to manage is that to convey this message to these four states that we do know that this is a state-to-state procedure, but for the procedure, for the process to be legitimate and for you to have the full support of the civil society, you need to ensure the participation of Afghan women at every stage of this process. I mean, from what I know is that everything, especially in the negotiation phases, is very confidential. So to be honest, I don't really know if they had met with the Taliban. I don't really know what would be the framework of these negotiations. I mean, speaking from a legal perspective, it won't be a negotiation where, for example, the Prime Minister of, I don't know, Australia, I'm talking with Hibatullah Khanzada, it's not like that. It's more of a legal negotiation. So I'm assuming that their legal representatives will be meeting and will be negotiating to see if they can resolve the dispute at this point. But still, I'm very much like interested to know which provisions of CEDA are they prioritizing at this point, what time frame they are considering, what would be their ideal scenario that they say that, okay, now we can say that the negotiation has fulfilled what we wanted. What would be the worst case scenario? When would they move to arbitration? So we don't really have much of a clarity about the process itself, about how these four states are handling. And I'm hoping that they are listening to the call of civil society. I'm happy to put the statement in the chat. So if people are more interested, they can go and read, because we have very concrete recommendations to these states on how to handle and how to open spaces for women to be part of it, because unfortunately ICJ, like ICC, doesn't have a procedure for witnesses and survivors. But one thing that we're also trying to push the narrative is that Afghan women are not only victims and survivors. They are agents of change, they're experts, they're communication experts, they're legal experts. They should be part of the legal team. If the case ever goes to the ICJ, there needs to be a seat for Afghan women. And at the end of the day, I think the fact that these four states are willing to take Afghanistan to the International Court of Justice, they also need to understand that it is, at the end of the day, actually, it is the case of women of Afghanistan at the highest court of justice. So, I mean, as much as legally it is the damaged party of these four states, which still, I mean, when I say it still like feels quite strange to me, but it is one of Afghanistan. So I'm hoping that they're also able to facilitate this as an opportunity for women of Afghanistan to be able to present their case and to be able to document this extent of the repression in the country at the highest court of justice.
Great, thank you. With that, I will ask for Mariana's assistance so we can open up what's in the chat box, sorry, the Q&A box.
Yes, hi everyone, and I would like also to join my colleagues in thanking Ferashta, Shahzad, and BM for their expertise and testimony of what's going on in Afghanistan. Thank you so much. So we have 4 questions. I'm going to start with one that, so thank you so much for your insightful talks, everyone. Grateful to be part of this conversation. This is from Pratiksha Patak. Maybe I'm not going to read the names in a worry not to misread them. So the question is, with the passage of time, are there any new or emerging patterns that you have observed from both the Taliban and from other propagandist institutions? So this is a general question. I don't know if anyone wishes to take it, or should I read them all, Julia?
Why don't we, I'm looking at the 4 right now. Why don't you read that and maybe one other, and we can take 2 at a time.
Okay, so someone is asking regarding the healthcare situation in Afghanistan. With knowing the significant impact of the Taliban regime on the sexual and reproductive rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, how have you seen the healthcare system impacted, and what is being done to fill this gap? And in your opinions, what do you believe are barriers, and what you suggest to amplify sexual and reproductive health rights for women and girls and provide access to care. Again, this is not directed to one speaker specifically.
Great. So with these two questions, I think, oh, I was going to say if anyone would like to take them on first, but Shahrazad, you are volunteering, so please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure colleagues will have more to add. Just on the propaganda question, I mean, I think we don't necessarily look at Taliban propaganda per se, but we do see how they are trying to shape narratives about various issues. And as I said earlier, how some of the work that they do around, for instance, countering human rights values through education, through media. Looking at that, we have been looking initially since their return to power. For instance, there was a whole discussion about amnesty that was they supposedly granted general amnesty, but there was then a lot of narrative from Taliban officials and leaders about how essentially those who have resisted the Taliban in the past, i.e. former military, former security forces, or who resist Taliban now, are not Muslim, or they are in fact the word that they used, Khawarij. And they used this labeling, this narrative to sort of justify that it's okay to kill these people. It's allowed, it's permissible to kill. So creating this using using religious rhetoric and going back to the history of Islam, but repurposing it for their own political purposes, for their own political agenda, which is elimination of their enemies or people who they see as enemies. Similarly, with women protesters, when they started coming to streets, Taliban started this narrative about the fact that all these women are just doing this because they want to get asylum cases and leave Afghanistan, that they are not organic forces, that they are not genuine in their struggle, that everything they just want to be accepted for asylum. And they try to even get forced confessions from women to sort of certify this claim that they were making, this narrative that they were making. They have also constructed a whole narrative around Afghans who are outside Afghanistan and who speak up against the Taliban as people who have betrayed Afghanistan, who are corrupt, regardless of which sector they were at or where they worked, and that they are loyal to a Western agenda. And so there's a lot, particularly with women, there's a lot of work trying to construct that narrative. I remember it was in early 2022 when the European Parliament had a special session on women, and invited a group of Afghan women to the Parliament to speak. At the same time, Taliban organized in an office, they brought a group of Afghan women I don't know if they were Afghan, but with their faces covered, holding pictures of all of us who were at the EU Parliament at the time, and big red crosses on our faces saying these women don't represent us. So all these efforts to try to delegitimize voices from outside Afghanistan. And unfortunately, sometimes international community also falls into this narrative, into the trap of this narrative around, inside, outside. While this is a false dichotomy. We all have family living inside Afghanistan. Some of us have ongoing work inside Afghanistan. Some of the people who are inside Afghanistan, women who are working inside Afghanistan and may publicly have views closer to Taliban, in fact, have family outside Afghanistan. Their own daughters may not be impacted. So it's a much more complex reality than that. But this is also another ways in which Taliban try to create a narrative. It is very much a narrative and perception war, which is why I think it's also important to frame these accountability efforts in a way that's understandable to Afghan people, and to communicate, for instance, about very technical and legal cases like the potential ICJ case in a way that's that's understandable and accessible to the Afghan public, and to have Afghan media on our side, so that battle for narratives is not that space is not left to the Taliban to win. That misinformation does not try to change it. They of course always deny their abuses. It's well documented. For instance, torture. There are many allegations of torture. If you look at witness testimony, if you look at survivor testimonies, the level of detail that it offers, the kind of people, perpetrators that they name, and you match them, it's very clear, it's very verifiable. However, Taliban first tried to silence anyone, so everyone who is held in custody is, when they are freed after giving a guarantee that they will not talk about their experience in detention with anyone. And if they do, that they will face consequences, their family will face consequences, but also they lie through their teeth saying there's no torture in our place of detention. And so, of course, it's important for us then to get our reports and other independent human rights reports, make sure that they are also published in local languages and the Afghan media cover them enough to counter that narrative. On the healthcare question, I'll leave most of it to Farshad, as she, as Human Rights Watch, did a special report on women's access to healthcare inside Afghanistan recently. But I would just say that also in the context of our discussions in Germany, and we were talking about the right to healthcare, although there is not a ban on the right to healthcare as a whole, Taliban have removed contraceptives from clinics and from pharmacies. Taliban have made it difficult, much more complicated for women to access healthcare by requiring women to have men accompanying them to access healthcare facilities, which basically means that if you are at home and you have a sudden pain, let's say, and you want to go to the doctor because you're concerned, you have to have your husband or your brother or someone who is free and available at the time to take you to that to doctor. Or if you're a woman who has just given birth and is bleeding severely, you need, a man to accompany, not only consent, but accompany you to the healthcare facilities. Similarly, for healthcare workers, they have made it more and more difficult. I know healthcare workers, female healthcare workers, that really want to continue their work. They know how essential it is, but they're less and less willing to do so because of the harassment that they face about their outfit, but also about having a male companion accompanied them. There were healthcare workers who lived in other provinces to deliver healthcare services. Now that's no longer possible for them because they have to have a male family member to abandon their life and come and live with them so that they can continue their work, etc. So the right to freedom of movement, the right to freedom of education, the ban on women's education and healthcare institutions, all of these rights are interconnected to each other and have really made access, particularly to sexual and reproductive healthcare services, very, very challenging.
Great, thank you. Fresh or BM, BM, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. I just want to shed a little bit more light about the healthcare question that we just have. I want to just say two things about this important issue. That first, that the first thing that we need to consider, we need to take into consideration is about the healthcare workforce shortage. What I mean is that female healthcare workers face restrictions on employment and movement, which reduces the number of professionals available to provide care, and male doctors are often not permitted to treat female patients, further limiting access. And the second important thing is that the closure of clinics and funding cuts. Many international organizations that previously supported Afghanistan's healthcare system, such as UN agencies and NGOs, struggled to continue operation due to funding shortfalls and restrictions imposed by Taliban. So the international community wants to just use this as a has a tool to just make more, to restrict more Talibans to just give up on what they are doing. But the thing that we are all forgetting, both international community and Taliban itself, they do not want to just remember, they do not just want to think about Afghan women, is that if we cut these funds, if we do not help Afghan women in especially in the healthcare system, so we will lose more mothers, we will lose more Afghan women. So So this is what we can see, that we are. Yeah, another important point that I want to mention is that Taliban they do not pay up on doctors, women. So especially those who are working in governmental hospital. One of my one of my relatives is working in a governmental hospital. She has not been paid for months, and they are working hard. And this is all the issues that we can raise about the healthcare system. The thing that we must, take into consideration the most. Thank you.
No, thanks, especially from that perspective from on the ground. Freshto, is there anything you'd like to add to this question?
No, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. One thing that I wanted to add is the impact of the recent aid cuts on Afghanistan. US is one of the biggest funders of the humanitarian aid in Afghanistan. I mean, I think around 60% of the aid that's going in Afghanistan used to be funded by the US. And it was last week that the UN announced that 320 hospitals have been closed down as a result of the executive order itself. And that, I mean, in basic words, means that it's impacting the lives of millions of Afghans on the ground. It means that a clinic or a hospital or a health facility in most of the cases is the only place that people can go to receive the basic and fundamental and the basic health services, and that does not exist anymore. So what I'm trying to say is that the health system is sort of crashed from multiple parties. The donor countries, the Taliban restrictions, and at the end of the day, the victims are actually the ordinary Afghans. So it's very, I mean, disheartening and devastating to see that happening.
Great, thank you. Our next question.
Julie, okay, should I? Okay, perfect. So two last questions, and I would have one, but only if we have time. So this one is directed to Fereshta. Can you please explain more on what's the further steps, actions of ICC against the Taliban leaders, and what do you think the possibility of these Taliban leaders responsible for all the atrocities and crimes they have committed, that they are brought to justice?
So, I mean, in terms of the next steps, the next step at this point is for the arrest warrants to be issued. So they have been requested, but now they need to be issued. And once they're issued, the Taliban leaders, the two people who are being identified, could be arrested if they travel to any of the ICC member states. I mean, theoretically, the state of Afghanistan is responsible to actually hand them over. But I mean, at this point, I think it's difficult for them for that to happen. So in that sense, I mean, our next hope is that if they travel to an ICC member state, then they should be arrested. The possibility of traveling them outside Afghanistan is also very narrow and very low, especially for the Haibatullah himself. I haven't heard of him traveling in the past 3.5 years. So it would be difficult to, I mean, arrest them and then to actually bring them to a court and then convict them. So that's difficult, but I mean, nonetheless, that doesn't mean that this step itself doesn't mean anything. I would say that Haibatullah's world has already shrunk. He knows that he cannot travel. The day after the announcement, the local media reported that there was a heavy military presence in Kandahar, which is the province that he's living in, which means that he kind of felt the threat that he could be arrested, like the day after the requests of the applications of arrest warrants. The Taliban have already responded, I mean, reactions that they're withdrawing from ICC. So the fact that they feel compelled to respond to these itself shows that they know the weight of these sort of international accountability mechanisms. So, I mean, I know that we all ideally would want to see these people to be convicted in a court of law for what they're doing against women and girls. It is difficult, but you never really know. So and I mean, and at the same time, I think for them to know that from once they issue the arrest warrants are issued, it's very difficult for them to travel, and their world is basically, I mean, it has shrunk and is getting smaller and smaller, and he is not able to move freely. I think that means I think that itself is huge. And for them to, and it sent a strong message for them that they basically cannot do everything in Afghanistan with immunity, because they have been doing it. The Taliban have not been accountable to anyone, to any international court, any national court in the past 3.5 years. And I think it's huge for the ISIS investigation to reach to a point to identify 2 of their leaders. And the good thing about the ICC arrest warrant is that once it's issued, it will always be in your head, like always, until it's cleared, which means that until you have a defense lawyer and then you come to the court and you defend yourself and like this sort of thing. Otherwise, let's say that if in the next 10 years the Taliban are not in Afghanistan anymore, that doesn't mean that the ICC arrest warrant on Hibatullah's head will also dissolve. So it will always be on his head.
Thank you so much.
And I can take on the last one because also I have some thoughts on it directly. And then we probably, depending on if there are other input, we will have time for more or not. So the last question is that the statement that many universities offered support and funding for women for Afghanistan in 2021 and 2022, but these seem to have ended. Can you share any information about continuing scholarship schemes for women, including support for application fees, which are enough to place a barrier to applying? I mean, this I can, at least from the academic side, say that yes, I mean, I completely agree with the first statement. The scholarship schemes are becoming fewer and fewer, especially directed towards Afghans, not just, you know, people coming from places of conflict or refugee status type of situations. There are many universities that run still some programs. I know one of our neighbor universities here, University of Padua, still does have, for example, a program specific to Afghans. Some of the others, our other speakers here may know of some more international type or private ones. The second part, though, about the supportive application fees is something I do want to mention because, yes, very few do cover that part or the visa fees needed, especially because if someone is going somewhere that is outside of Pakistan or Iran or another country where they need to go to get the visa, there are all those extra fees that often are not covered. And this is an extra barrier of needing to get somewhere to get the visa, even to get somewhere like Europe. For example, for Italy, a woman in Afghanistan or anyone will first have to go to Pakistan or Iran to apply for the visa in Pakistan or Iran, and wait their time there. So there are a lot of extra fees that most people do not realize when it comes to the situation. So I wanted to kind of add that because it is a great barrier. But I guess quickly, does anyone else on our panel here know of any, off the top of their head quickly, any scholarship schemes that we could maybe put into the chat? If not, we can probably move into closing. Maybe not. Okay. If we think of any, I guess also please do, who asked the question, I'll put my email into the chat. It also was in your confirmation email for any questions, and I can try to answer some more of that. And we do see someone just entered in the chat into the question box. LSE introduced one and Westminster did. Not sure if they're still available. So there is that to add. So going into our closing, I do want to thank everyone again. Before we close, though, as mentioned in the very beginning, the E.MA Alumni Association, with their advocacy committee, is doing some work specifically on Afghanistan, as was mentioned in the very beginning by Rosita. I'd like to hand the floor over to Mariana to present a letter that the advocacy committee has done and would like to expand on.
Yes, thank you so much, Julia. So basically, the advocacy committee, one of the priorities of the advocacy committee, as Rosita said, is Afghanistan. And one of the first initiatives that we had was to write a letter and send a letter on February the 27th to the European Commission. This was a collective effort from the advocacy committee, Afghan experts. By the way, thanks for all of those that contributed and brought their expertise into the letter. It's available on the E.MA Association LinkedIn. So I will put a link to the content of the letter. but I wanted to very quickly present the 5 main actions that it articulates around. The first was to strengthen human rights monitoring and increase targeted sanctions against the Taliban regime, legally recognize gender apartheid in Afghanistan as a crime against humanity. The European Parliament has recognized it, but not the member states. Expedite refugee status and protection for Afghan women inside and outside Afghanistan. Increase humanitarian support for Afghan women and girls, and finally advocate for Afghan women's representation in international forums and increase funding for CSO, civil society organizations working on women's rights issues. We then decided to collaborate. We wanted to do a webinar, and we realized that actually the Global Campus of Human Rights had these series. So we collaborated with the Global Campus in organizing this webinar. And our next actions as part of the advocacy committee will be to closely monitor an answer that we hopefully are going to get, to stay informed and monitor the situation in Afghanistan, and perhaps also write an article on it. So we really want to keep Afghanistan high, as we obviously, as activists, as experts in human rights, have noticed that the interest of the international community on Afghanistan has dropped. And given that what's been happening globally, it seems that it's not looking good in keeping Afghanistan in the agenda. Finally, for us, of course, this is voluntary work. So and thank you so much for the speakers to having agreed to be here. We really appreciate your time. And I wanted to extend an invitation to past students of the E.MA globally to join us, the association, so that we can collaboratively continue doing these advocacy efforts. And we need all the expertise and our sharp minds, especially in the current days, to help us do these kind of actions. So that's all on my behalf, and thank you so much for coming today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mariana. And yes, again, thank you and appreciation to the E.MA Alumni Association for the work they're doing to highlight and promote Afghanistan and, of course, the abuses that are going on against women. Coming into our close, yes, a final thank you to our speakers, of course, B.M. Farashta and Shahrazad. Our next session, for those who do follow our speaker session or would like to join, will be in April. We always, except for today, we do the first Thursday of the month at this time from 3 to 4:30. Today was an exception to work with the very busy schedules of our speakers, with coming from the Human Rights Council, going into Women's Day, and CSW coming up. It's a very, very busy time for anyone who does work in, of course, the field of women's rights. But it will be Thursday, April 3rd, with Mehdi Hakimi, who is he is a wonderful and prolific writer, researcher, and lawyer. He is currently the editor-in-chief at the Oxford University Commonwealth Law Journal, and he has written a wealth of articles and done research, one on Afghanistan in general, but also specifically on the Hazara. So if you are interested, please do join us. If you are not already part of our email list, I am putting the link in right now, so you may join. We usually put out information 2 weeks before the session, both in email and then also on the Global Campus and my own personal social channels. So please stay tuned. And with that, a very big last thank you and to both our speakers and also our attendees for joining today. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.